Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
All is well, all is well. Thank you so much for coming on the platform. I really appreciate you taking out the time to come by and talk to us about, the amazing work that you have been doing.
Oh, that's so kind. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the interest.
It's definitely an honor. So I guess for the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and definitely, what you do?
Sure. So I'm Sheri Johnson. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. And my work is focused on really kind of two themes. One is understanding people who struggle with being impulsive once they're in a state of high emotion. So when they're kind of going, making those mistakes that they later regret. And then the other focus of my work has been on bipolar disorder.
Wow, okay, that's amazing. Now I would like to know, when did you develop this passion, for I guess psychology and bipolar disorder and different things like that?
So I knew I wanted to be a psychologist for a long time, and I thought I was going to study depression and why it was happening to women. And then, as the last year getting my PhD, I worked in a inpatient hospital for people with mental health problems, and I started meeting people with bipolar disorder. And I was really drawn towards them. I was drawn towards the challenges they were facing. And then over time, I started realizing, wow, there is a lot we don't know that we need to work on. So then I was hooked. And we can talk more about that. There were definitely some big moments in figuring that out. And then it wasn't for another 10 or 15 years that I started to think a lot about the struggle to kind of keep yourself in check and in control when you're in a state of high emotion, which is often a problem for people with bipolar disorder. But I started to realize it's a problem for a lot of people. So even if they don't have bipolar disorder, and I got kind of fascinated by that.
Wow, okay, okay. Now I can ask you, what exactly is high emotion? Like, what is an example of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, Probably the thing that comes to mind most easily is being angry, right? Most of us, when we're angry, it's really hard to be super controlled. But imagine that even emotions that a lot of people can kind of manage more easily would trip you up. So, what if, look, when you were happy, you kind of did things like gambled or drove recklessly? Or what if when you were feeling frightened, tended to overeat or do things where you're sort of not doing what you want to do? So there are people who sort of say that in a lot of their day-to-day life, whatever the kind of high intensity emotion is, it just gets hard for them to regulate how they respond to it. And to be fair, emotions are a challenge for all of us, but they're more of a challenge for some people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, I think since post pandemic, post COVID, there have been more conversations about mental health, at least, outside of the classroom and outside of the professional world. Now, have you seen a change, in terms of your students and, interacting with people and, trying to get them to understand this information?
I think there have been huge changes, and some of it for the good. I think we're finally having the conversations, and we're finally kind of reaching this tipping point where a lot of people feel comfortable about talking about what they're going through. So I used to say when I started my class, when I was teaching clinical psychology to hundreds of undergraduates, I'd say, has anyone here had exposure to this concern? And a couple of people would like kind of meekly put their hand up. Now, the start of the class, everybody, you can assume, knows somebody, and they're well aware of kind of the people in their life who've often had these struggles. And many, many more people are coming forward and saying, yeah, I have this. Does anyone in the class want to understand what it's like from my lens? So that's been really terrific. What's less terrific is that young people are really struggling with mental health problems, and they're struggling more than we ever saw before. We're seeing increases in rates of suicidality. Um, there's a lot of desperation and unhappiness and mental health symptoms out there, and everybody's kind of trying to figure out what causes that kind of increase and why we're in the middle of that. So I'd say there's some changes going on that are great and some changes that are going on that are really troubling.
Okay, okay. Now I wanted to ask you about the program that you had just sent me a link about, and it's like I guess for bipolar in particular. If you could talk about that, what's the inspiration behind that, and what exactly does it encompass?
Thank you so much. Yeah, we just got a grant from the Wellcome Trust, and the focus of the grant will be on, can we help people with bipolar disorder by adding coaching around healthy lifestyles and healthy eating to their regular medication profile? There's a lot of reasons to do that. I mean, medications are a great first step. They really help, but a lot of people still go through periods of symptoms or they'll have relapses. So we got to do more. And you might wonder, well, what the heck? Why diet? Well, one, eating healthy is great for all of us. It's great for our hearts, for diabetes, for our brains, for, for strength, all of those kinds of things. And the evidence is really in on that. It's been less tested in bipolar disorder, though. And the reason that I think that that's really a shame is because people with bipolar disorder have really, really high rates of medical health concerns, and particularly the kinds of things that are related often to your diet, like they're at higher risk for heart problems, for diabetes, for weight gain, for metabolic kinds of concerns. Diet is a great way to help with that. And it turns out that if you can get those medical health concerns under control for people with bipolar disorder, they tend to have less symptoms over time. They tend to just do better. Why not give people real solid coaching about the best diets for those kinds of general health issues and see if we can help? Because it looks like if they can be healthier physically, that's going to help with the symptoms. And so we really, really want to test that. We've chosen two diets. One is probably the most famous diet out there, the Mediterranean diet, which you don't actually have to eat Italian and Spanish food, but you do have to eat a lot of vegetables and grains and whole foods and skip the junk food, and just, kind of have calories that are not empty calories. Eat a kind of beautiful produce-rich diet. That one's pretty well known, but we're still going to coach people on how to make it work for them. So for example, people think, oh, I have to eat Italian food, but you can change the spices if you like Mexican or Indian food, right? You can do it on a budget, and we're going to teach people about that. So we really want to kind of tailor it so that people don't hit so many barriers in kind of making it work. The other diet, a lot fewer people have heard about, but it's something called time-restricted eating. And this is kind of wild. This came out of mouse studies where they started to realize that if you feed mice really carefully at the same time during their wake period every day, for mice it's every night, but same time period, it has all these beautiful benefits for their metabolic health. And it helped them sleep better and have a stronger day-night rhythm. Now, why would we care about that? Well, one, the metabolic benefits are fascinating. Two, people with bipolar disorder often have really a hard time with those day-night rhythms. They can get super revved up at night, get a little hypomanic, can't get their goals out of their mind, can't go to sleep. That's trouble. But also sometimes they have a really hard time getting fully going during the daylight, and they'll feel kind of depressed and sluggish. And so, boy, if we could help with that kind of feeling, that might directly help with some of the symptoms. And then there's this beauty of how easy it is, because it's not trying to restrict what you eat. It's just kind of watch when you eat. There again, easier said than done. And so we'll work with people to kind of log what their typical eating and social pattern is. When do they go out to eat with friends? Who do they see at breakfast time? Figure out what's going to work for them. Really tailor this for people and give them a lot of input about how to make it as smooth as possible. So those are the two diets with a lot of coaching. They can call in during our program and get tips every week from people with lived experience who are used to following this. And we're excited to try it because if it works, imagine that we could send out free advice across the world that might help people with bipolar disorder if the medications aren't doing enough for them. So we'd love to see it work, and we're excited to test it with people.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. Now, are there any requirements to be a part of the program? Is it a cost? Is it a time period?
Yeah, so there are requirements because this is early, right? And when you're testing something new, you want to be super, super careful. So we want to make sure people already have a doctor for their bipolar disorder who's taking good care of them. If they don't, we'll help them get a doctor. Um, we want to make sure they don't have medical conditions where they shouldn't be shifting around their diet. So there's some GI conditions where like we shouldn't be messing with their diet. We want to make sure that their weight's stable so that we're not in the middle of somebody just went on Ozempic and they're dropping 25 pounds and then we come along and try and test diet. If they are, we're like, okay, hold off, get to a stable weight, and then we'll bring you in. So there's requirements like that. People have to be up for doing this program. And then I would say the other thing about it is we want to know everything we can about how it works. And so we ask a ton of questions. And so across the course of a year, well, how does it work? You do a 2-week baseline, so we really know how things go for the person before they start. Then 8 weeks of following the food plan and each day kind of taking a snapshot of what you eat. So that's intensive. And then across the course of that next year, we want to follow lots of different ways this works and doesn't work. So people spend up to 20 hours filling in forms. We Zoom call, we do phone calls, to just check in and see what are the outcomes, what's going well and what's not. The good news is everything's remote. So people can do this from all over English-speaking countries. They can join this study from the UK, from India, Canada. We're, we really want to reach out and see how it works for people from all over the place.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's amazing. Now, can I ask you, in terms of bipolar, are there any things that cause it, or is there any way that you can prevent, I guess developing it or having it?
Yeah. Well, so those are great questions. I mean, bipolar disorder is very much genetic. Most of the people who are going to get it have it somewhere in their family. And sometimes it's like a grandparent that never got fully diagnosed. But then when they get the diagnosis, they start to think, well, there was that period where sort of grandma, had some struggles. And so it's often, it runs in families, but that is not to say that it always has to look the same. We've gotten a lot better treatments across the generations, more medications that people can try, and we do know more about how to kind of prevent the triggers. I actually got kind of tired of that information not being out there. And so one of the things I did is I worked with colleagues to write a really short book called Bipolar Disorder for the Newly Diagnosed to try and help people think about, okay, if you've been told you have this, what are the triggers and what are the ways you can keep yourself a little safer with this? So sure, you get your medications, but turns out there's things like you should not skip sleep. There was actually an Italian study where they kept people with bipolar disorder up all night. And by the next morning, 10% of them were moving into having manic symptoms. It had really set off relapse for a lot of people. So there's something about sleep that's incredibly protective for people with bipolar disorder. So I always say that that's like one of the first things to kind of watch out for. And I'll even tell people, look, if you're worried about your kids, if you have this and you're worried about how to keep your kids safe from it, make sure your kids are protecting their sleep. people shouldn't do drugs that mess with sleep. So things like speed and cocaine that make people really revved up, those are super dangerous in setting off episodes. So there's a lot of things you can learn to do that would keep you safer from having an episode. There's a whole nother bucket of skills that I like to think about, which is, okay, if you were to have an episode, what would be the best way to keep you safe if that comes on? How do you have a doctor that you can get in touch with within a matter of hours who will help adjust your medications? How do you have people who love you, who know what to look out for, who would sort of say, all right, you're looking a little too peppy, let's help you with that? And then how do you do things? Often when people are manic, they'll do things that involve a lot of taking risks, spending money, being very public in ways they wouldn't normally do. And there's a lot of strategies to keep that kind of in check. So for example, some people sort of hand over their credit cards and their checkbook. So that it's like, keep me from spending money right now, right? And there's a lot of strategies like that. Like if somebody was about to interview with you and they were feeling a little manic, they might say, you know what, this is a day I need to kind of retreat, not do a lot of public appearances, just be in a really quiet, private space till I can get this under check.
Okay. Now let me see. You've done a lot of amazing work. You've done a lot of research. You worked on a lot of books. Have you ever been a part of or considered doing maybe like a documentary on any of these topics?
Oh, that's a great question. There is a group that's working on a documentary now to help people understand, excuse me, more about bipolar 2 disorder. So I'll do interviews for groups like that to try and contribute what I know. I'm actually very camera shy, so I'm the last person who wants to be on the camera for a whole lot. And I don't have your skill set of like putting together these beautiful videos. And I realize like, wow, that is a whole art form that I don't have. But I always try and help people who are putting these things together. So
No, okay. I definitely appreciate that. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the books that you have authored and co-authored. Let me see. I guess I could start with the last one, The Science and Treatment of Psychological Disorders. Is that a textbook?
yeah, so I do an undergraduate textbook with my close friend Anne Crane. We've been doing that for a lot of years. And there's a couple reasons I want to do it. One is because it's the chance when people are young and trying to make sense of what is mental health all about for us to bring forward a pretty compassionate perspective. So we try and have like page-long descriptions of people who experience this, first-person accounts, to really drive home like, this is not some alien experience, mental health stuff. This is our community. These are our people. This is happening to our brothers, our sisters, people we know and love, and many people who are really, really successful. So we wanted to kind of help break the stigma and help people think about this in a kind way. The other reason we want to do it is because the science is really exciting and it's really rapidly changing. And so every couple of years we sit down, we go through thousands of abstracts to say, like, where is the science changing? Where is there something new? And where is it sticking, right? Because, there's all this debate about is science really uncovering the truth? Sometimes they find something and it doesn't replicate. We're looking for like, what's replicating, what's new, what's exciting. And then we're trying to tuck that in and describe it for people in everyday English because we actually think it's really cool. So it's fun for me to read all that stuff every couple summers, but I also really want to be a translator to help people think about, science is going to make a difference out there. And here's examples of ways in which our science is changing and we're developing new ideas. The other thing, which I think some students don't love, is to help those who see themselves going into the field think about, yeah, and we still have gaps, and help pointing out, like, honestly, here's something we don't know yet. Here's someplace we need to get better. Some students hate that. They just want to know, tell me what we know. But I think for people who are sort of wired to become scientists, they love hearing that there's something that they can imagine that in the next 10 years, they're going to help fill that goal. So I think those are some of the reasons we do it. It's kind of an interesting, passion project to bury yourself in the literature and try and think, though, about like what's changing and what's new and what's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely sounds exciting. Now I can ask you this because you've been doing it for a few years now. How has the internet, I mean that in a good way, how has the internet affected, like you say, trying to work on the stigma of mental health and also sharing that new information? Has it done more good or bad or kind of in the middle?
Oh man, initially I thought this is amazing. We can get the word out to everybody. We can do a lot of public health good. People have access to information at their fingertips. And then I don't know, lately I'm a little discouraged. I see like top politicians and media outlets bashing people over mental health problems, and that's that to me is crushing. I'm like, wow, like I hope 100 years from now somebody looks back on that and says like that's like a caveman act. How were people doing that, So so I think there's some people using it as a force for good and some people that are being, just painfully terrible about it.
Okay, okay. Now let me see. I can ask you about now abnormal psychology. I see it's different editions, so that's a textbook as well.
Yeah, for years we wanted to change that title. Um, and they finally let us. We hate that title. That's why we changed to the science and treatment of, um, it was the title that was in use, I don't know, from the 50s forward. And our textbook publishers were worried, like, oh, people are going to look for that title when they're teaching this class. And we're like, well, they need to stop doing that. And we finally got them to shift. So we're excited to have the new title.
Okay, okay. Now what about okay, bipolar disorder, a guide for the newly diagnosed?
Yeah. That is a really short kind of way to say to anybody who has bipolar disorder, here's stuff I just want you to know for taking good care of yourself. What do you need to know about these medications? What are the things you can ask your doctor? How might you ask that? What are ways to avoid triggers? What are good self-care strategies? How could you think about rebuilding after you go through an episode? Like all these kind of things that may seem, you know, a lot of people already figure this out, but I always kind of feel like you shouldn't have to figure that out on your own. So a lot of this came from over the years talking to, I don't know, hundreds of people with bipolar disorder, and some of them just had so much wisdom about how they were managing this. And I just wanted a way to get some of that wisdom about how you live a good life in the middle of having bipolar disorder out to as many people as we could.
Okay, okay. Now, to my understanding, September is Suicide Prevention Month or something like that. Is there any connection with maybe suicide prevention and bipolar disorder or any of the other disorders that you mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, sadly, people with bipolar disorder often struggle with suicidality. Um, Often people are really demoralized when they first hear they have the episode, have the diagnosis. They may have images of what it was like for their grandparents or older folks in their family and don't realize reasons for hope. They may not have great knowledge about self-management. They may not have heard that some of our most famous artists and entrepreneurs have bipolar disorder, that the outcomes are all over the map, and that we can teach people a lot about how to do well. So, during that early phase, there's a lot of risk, and then there's a lot of depression with this. My work on impulsivity also shows that that's a risk variable for suicidality. So there's the things I study often involve working with people who experience more than their share of suicidal thoughts, and even sometimes make actions based on that. I think there's a couple things. I mean, one is treatment really, really can help. But what I think of as good treatment is not just medications, which medications have been shown to drop the rates of suicidality and bipolar disorder like in half. Like that's pretty powerful. But also, like, everybody deserves a therapist with this. It's a hard thing to come to terms with. I have this thing that's going to mean that sometimes I can't quite trust the way my thoughts are going. And it may come on at times when I'm not expecting it to come on. And it may damage relationships when I go through that. And I'm going to need to rebuild. So I think everybody deserves to have somebody in their court around all that. And I guess the other thing I would say is often, if our friends or family are struggling, it can feel like it's too much to talk with them about these kinds of topics, like thinking about death or dying. And so sometimes what you'll see is the person who's struggling with feeling like life isn't worth living kind of brings it up. And it's scary to have that conversation. And a lot of people feel like, well, if I open up that door, am I doing this person some harm? Am I going to kind of say like, oh, it's okay to be suicidal? But everything we know is that having somebody understand that you're going through those dark moments and be able to just sit with you and listen to that is super helpful. There's never been evidence that just listening to somebody and saying, I hear you. This is incredibly hard. I hear how hard it is for you, makes it more likely that they're going to hurt themselves. And then sometimes you can end up really being a voice to say, look, you deserve to have a therapist. You deserve to have somebody who's coaching you through this and helping you get through it, and kind of demystify that process. So I think there's a lot that we can all do to try and help each other get through dark times and come through the other side.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of viewers can utilize that. That's very empowering. And, I really, really want to thank you again for coming on the show and sharing this wealth of information with us, because mental health is definitely important. We all human and we all go through it. Like you say, some people may be famous or rich or, people we admire, but at the end of the day, they're still human.
Yeah, we are. That's a beautiful way to say it. And I just want to thank you for doing your show.
No, I appreciate that. That really meant a lot to me. So I want to thank the viewers for tuning in. It's been a phenomenal episode. So until next time.